try this.
Hey everybody, there we go. Somehow it reset on me. I guess the computer updated the program in the middle of the night like it does sometimes. Well, hello everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another critique of the week. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, the point of the critique is to give that workshop experience to people who might not have access to it by sitting around the computer and looking at a couple poems and giving feedback on it. So tell us what you think in the chat window, and I'll pass along some of that stuff. Let us know like what's working and what's not, all that good stuff, and it'll help the poets out. Let me make sure everything's running before we jump in. Okay. I'm really impressed with myself that I fixed the mic that fast. It's because, there's only so many things that can go wrong. Well, I shouldn't say that. But that's something that's happened before. So I knew where to check first. Okay. So today's poets, we have two. And it's Anna Idelevich and Vicki Miko, who you'll definitely recognize if you're a regular viewer of the Rattlecast and things. Vicki is on all the time. She's the one pulled out in the drawing. We're actually going to do a drawing live on the air. I haven't done that in a couple weeks. We're a little bit overdue. So we're going to do a live drawing at the end of the show, too, for the next round of participants. I always pair a randomly drawn poet with a poet who matches well with them. So there's like a variety on the show, basically. And that's how we pick the poets we're going to go over here. And there's a link in the show notes if you'd like to enter yourself. So it's a submittal page. You submit your two poems that you'd like critiqued, and eventually your name will get called in the drawing. And okay, so let's look at the poem we have here. So this first one, okay, this is the first one by Vicki Miko, the longer of two. She's got a longer prose type poem and then a haiku sequence. So that's a great variety already. And Vicki said, just to give you an idea, there's a field on the submissions where you can say if you want us to talk about anything in particular. And Vicki says, any suggestions on beginnings and endings and finding my voice? I seem to like what I've written. I submit it, and then when I go back and reread it, it sounds awful or too abstract. And then she has a little smiley face. All suggestions would be well appreciated. She said, I'm a bit novice at submitting my stuff. And you can find Vicki at Vicki Miko. It's spelled like this, VickiMiko.com. And if you know from the Rattlecast, she has great haiga in particular. She takes a lot of photographs and matches them with haiku in a really wonderful way. If you go to her website, VickiMiko.com, you can check out some of that stuff. But let's look at this longer poem and think about voice as we look at it too in particular. I think this is a little just off. That's better. Okay. A view from a cellophane window. You were 4 years old when the Liberty ship's Grand Camp and the High Flyer exploded in the harbor, setting off chains of chemical explosions. Its seismic jolt registered 900 miles away. Two Cessnas vanished mid-flight over the flaming delta. One 3,000-pound anchor skyrocketed over 2 miles inland. A deadly fang of steel bombed through the bathroom ceiling at your house on Texas Avenue, only 4 blocks from the waterfront. You remember the boom and the fiery smoke blowing up the reddest, blackest nimbus. Your mama and your sisters grabbed you off the porch. You remember the pain of your eardrums bursting. Your family was one in thousands of tethered families hurled into a sudden exodus. Hundreds flooded away from the coastline to the inland zone, going nowhere on roads to nowhere. You remember Pappy's green Ford. He drove you and your mama and all your siblings to Camp Wallace. He took you with him to pick up the others. There were many others who came. Some stayed and some left. You remember the big rooms with high ceilings that echoed. You remember the cot all your own. You remember the skinny blanket. You remember the butter sandwiches and corn flakes and chocolate milk. You remember all the kids playing hide and seek and kick the ball. You remember the cries at night, but never asked why. Está bien, your mama said. Industrial conglomerates prioritized their Bayside tinder fumes and fluorescent clouds of burning gas flares. They robbed years to remold the neighborhoods and storefronts. No one could bring back hundreds who died. No one could bring back the thousands of gutted livelihoods. No one could heal the terrible hurt. At times your impression drifted back after your family settled into the house on 6th Street. You smelled the coffee in the morning before your pappy drove off to the foundry, his gray thermos and a lunch pail abundant with backyard figs and fresh-made empanadas. Your mama put the fresh picket cactus tuna into her new washing machine and that rumbled on the back porch. The red greens spun out into an exact smoothness, the thorns collected in the holy spin cycle. Seasoned only with salt, those thornless cactus were cooked to perfection. Tortillas fresh made for your 7 siblings, plus mama y papa. The neighbors came too, always welcomed by the smell of the buñuelos, fresh made. You remember the gassy exhaust wafting up and down the alleyways, hanging over the playground, the harbor walls, Manny's drugstore, and Our Lady of Snows, the eccentric old lady who supplied your paper route papers. Her house with the tunneled corridors of stacked magazines, scrappled newspapers, and dog toys piled up to the ceiling. On occasion, you said you and your pappy sat there spellbound as she talked, with a whistle and a cough, about the explosion, when her beloved sheepdog saved the mama, cow, and calf. Fresh fumes from the retching seaport refineries still loomed over the receding neighborhoods. Huge torches still flamed in the day and night skies. Why is there fire up there? You once wondered, but never asked. You were more interested in the treasured dump, where you and your comrades salvaged bike parts and splayed supine in the dirt to count the clouds, the stars. It was a time when you fished for sea monsters off the pier. It was a time when you shined shoes at Ned's corner bar. You collected, sorted, then sold hangers back to the dry cleaners on 6th Street. 2 cents a dozen, taking turns polishing the green Ford your pappy tossed, the nickel that always landed heads. Your enterprise saved just enough to buy your mama another little potted plant from the dime store, and your face shone. So, interesting poem here by Vicki. This is a view from the cellophane window. And it's an interesting recounting of this story. What is, let me look at the details of this. The Liberty, the Grand Camp and High Flyer. I think I vaguely remember Grand Camp and High Flyer. I kind of remember this, but kind of don't. Let's see. It's a Texas City disaster. And so this was, on a Wednesday night, a huge explosion ripped through West Texas, a small central Texas town south of Dallas. A fertilizer factory caught fire and exploded, leveling homes and buildings for 5-block areas, killing 40 people and injuring more than 180 others. The scope of the damage and the number of the dead and injured are still being tallied. So with this poem, so the first thing that I think about with this poem is the you. We always talk about these you poems, and you. There's sort of 2 uses for you. You is either for the direct address, or the you just stands in for an I. And it's sort of like a more distant version of the I, like you're talking to yourself. And at first, you never know which one it is until you get some kind of clue to know which one it is. So for the first while, I'm not even sure where I realized that it was somebody else, but I believe it's somebody else. I'm not even sure, though. So if the poem is a direct address to somebody, you want to set that up right away. And usually you can just do that with a title. You can just explain who is talking to who. And then we don't have to waste our, mental energy trying to figure that out. Like it's like a puzzle, and we can just focus on the, what's going on in the language more. So that's the first thing I would do, is find a way to get to the you. Just in the title, A View from a Cellophane Window is a pretty, bland title. It doesn't add a whole lot. So instead of this title, like explain who the you is in the title, and then we'll know what's going on and who it is. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing for me, this is one of those poems where the details are interesting, but it goes on for a long time, and it doesn't have like an emotional grip for me. And so eventually, it feels more like a draft that needs to be condensed in. So if this poem were much shorter, I'm not sure what justifies the length really. even though there's a lot of great details in the poem. Let's go a little bit line by line. It's going to be a long poem. I don't want to take up too much time on this poem because we got other good stuff to look at too. But you were 4 years old when the Liberty ships. I mean, even this, this could be the title. You were 4 years old when the Liberty ship Grand Camp and the High Flyer exploded in the harbor. If you rephrase that to say who the you was, that could just be the title. And then we would know, we wouldn't have to figure it out. So maybe that's an option for the title, just pulling that up and then starting with like setting off the chains or whatever. Setting off chains of chemical explosions. Its seismic jolt registered 900 miles away. 2 Cessnas vanished mid-flight over the flaming delta. One 3,000-pound anchor skyrocketed over 2 miles. And then these are great details. But there's no emotional sort of investment in them because the you sort of drops out after the first, the very beginning. And so if we know who the you is, then we can take these really interesting details and add a layer of reaction to them. And how, I mean, even if it was just, like imagine if this was structured like this. It was saying, the explosion, blah, 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 setting off chains, but you in your bed didn't know this was happening. All you heard was the explosion and the windows, shattering or something. Like move from the details to the specific individual, the you, whoever that is. If you move to those details of the isolated space where the person who's being addressed here was, then you can get that emotional energy that's sort of missing. There's great details, but they're lacking that emotional pull behind them. And so mixing the details that are sort of general, interesting, like they're good details, but mixing those with more specific, references to what's going on in that immediate place where the you is, which it comes up later in the poem. So it does that, but at the beginning there's none of that, and that's why it doesn't feel as impactful as it could be in the beginning. A deadly fang of steel bombed through the bathroom ceiling at your house in Texas, only floor blocks from the waterfront. You remember the boom and the fiery smoke blowing up the reddest, blackest nimbus. Your mama and your sisters grabbed you off the porch. You remember the pain of your eardrums bursting. Yeah, so this is where we get into it. But see how they're separated? I'm talking about combining and sort of shrinking as a way to make the impact more powerful. Your family was one in thousands of tethered families hurled. And so see, even how this is explained, your family was one in thousands of tethered families hurled into a sudden exodus, hundreds flooding away from the coast. So again, we get this detail, but then we end up like flung way back and seeing like a bird's eye view of everything instead of sticking with the person and the immediate situation here. And the you remember becomes a kind of refrain, and I don't know. So this whole poem, I'm trying to show it could be condensed into like maybe half the length, and having the juxtaposition between those two places heightens the tension and the emotional impact of all the details that are going on. Let's see. He took you with him to pick up the others. There were many others who came. Some stayed, some left. So like some stayed, some left is a little. Too general of a detail. Like we want to look for things that we can trim out of here because I feel like this is too long for itself too. Remember all the kids playing hide and seek and kick the ball. You remember the cries at night, but never asked why. Está bien, your mama said. So this you remember is like a refrain, and there's something about you remember that's very. That's why I said before. I think you don't remember if you focus on that works a little better. That you remember is sort of expected, like all this is memory, and so it doesn't have as much impact as talking about what you don't remember. And so maybe that'd be a different way to structure this. The remember sort of it's almost like he said, she said in dialogue where it fades into the background and it doesn't really add anything. If you're telling it through the frame of you remember this, you remember this, you remember this. So maybe that's something to play with too. Industrial conglomerates prioritize their Bayside tinder, fumes, and fluorescent clouds and burning gas flares. They rubbed years and remolded the neighborhoods and storefronts. So this is just so distant from the actual person, from the you, that they're interesting details, but we don't have a connection to it again. So that where it's working more is where we talk about like Pappy's Green Ford and things like that. And then the details should be like sprinkled in with that instead of these big chunks, which it's almost like it reminds me a little bit of what's what's the Steinbeck book where they're going west? I don't know why I can't remember the name. I'm bad with names, but Grapes of Wrath, yeah. So it's like Grapes of Wrath, where you know how they have those chapters that are the personal story, and then they have the chapters that are sort of this overview and very like blocky with just a lot of details that don't have any characters. That's kind of how this poem feels, and it's hard to keep up an interest with details like these without characters and emotion tied to them. So combining the two and minimizing that, I think, and picking the details that are the most interesting and sticking with those and sticking with the story of the people. At times, your impressions drifted back after your family settled into the house on 6th Street. You smelled the coffee in the morning before your pappy drove off to the foundry, his gray thermos and lunch pail abandoned with brickyard figs and fresh-made empanadas. Your mama put the fresh-picked cactus tuna into her new washing machine and rumbled on the back porch. That's a great detail. I like that a lot. The red-green spun out to an exact smoothness. The thorns collected in the holy spin cycle. Seasoned only with salt, those thornless cactus were cooked to perfection. I think it's cacti, isn't it? Tortillas fresh made for your 7 siblings plus mama. The neighbors came too, always welcomed by the smell of buñuelos fresh made. You remembered the grassy exhaust wafting up and down the alleyways, hanging over the playground, the harbor walls. Yeah, so I think maybe for some reason I really feel like don't remember being a refrain might be an interesting way to sort of structure this poem instead of remember. Because what you don't remember is somehow more interesting in a way, in its relationship to you. Then there's always like a psychological tension going on. Let me see what the details, because this is just a long poem to go through line by line. So Nate Jacobs says, I feel like the you is indeed the I, the person telling the story, but it feels very removed, distant, and disconnected. Yeah, I still can't tell, actually, if the you is an I or is not. At some parts it feels like it is, just talking to yourself, and other times it doesn't. And maybe that's, I don't know. So is this personal narrative where the speaker's, the you is an I or not? T.R. Paulson had suggestion the best use of second person that I've ever seen is Susan Polwick's short story Gestella from her collection Fate of Mice. I immediately thought of that story, and perhaps this wants to be prose. That's another idea too. Something with arc and plot. Or I agree, as a poem it would be stronger, half or even a quarter as long. Unfortunately, this might mean cutting some great lines and details, but a lot of the details are great, but they weaken themselves in the poem's length. Yeah, good summary, TR. And that's another point too, that maybe, not everything is a story that's like fits the container of a poem as well as others. And maybe this is a fiction, and maybe that's, a whole arc of a story, that goes on for, thousands and thousands of words might be what this story really is. But for telling it as a poem, really, really find the best details and weave them in, weave the details about the general situation with the individual small, close-up details of the family life. Like that great detail about the washing machine. There are things like that that are just wonderful, and weaving them between the really interesting details like how far the anchor flew, but condensing it into a very small poem, I think is what needs to be done if this is going to be a successful poem. But it could just be a short story that wants to be a short story. Paul Corbeil says, I love the details of the gray thermos and coffee. You remember things work so well. Laurel Benjamin says, starting with a deadly fang of steel. And then building in some details would work because the image is a real grabber. Yeah, that's a good idea too. Good suggestion. Mark Grenier says, to me, the you seems to be the narrator recounting events from her childhood. It provides a wonderful reminiscence of a Latino family living in Texas. So, I don't know. I think most people are thinking that the you is just an I. And I don't know. I think it's too ambiguous. I can't tell. There's no giveaway. And the fact that we shouldn't be having to ask that question. I mean, there's some experimental ways that you could craft a poem so that has enough tension to be like a central thing, like whether or not, like not knowing who it is can be like the ambiguity of the poem. But that's not what you want here in most cases, I don't think. So just letting us know who the you is right away will sort of unlock the feeling of it. Because you can't really, I mean, the thing is this. You can't connect to somebody that you don't know, and that's what a poem is doing, is like building up somebody that you know through the voice, like Vicki asked about, and so that you can have an emotional connection with them. And if you don't know who the you is, if they're like a Schrodinger's cat kind of thing, where there could either be this or this, you can't connect with that, and that's why it doesn't have the emotional impact that it should, given the intensity of the story. So finding out who the you is right up front, just in the title. If it's or just use I. I mean, how is the poem, if it is I, like people are suggesting, how is the poem you just feel the difference. I was 4 years old when the Liberty ship's Grand Camp and the High Flyer exploded in the harbor, setting off chains of chemical explosions. I'll skip ahead to where there's more use, but I remember the boom and the fiery smoke blowing up into the reddest, blackest nimbus. My mama and my sisters grabbed me off the porch. I remember the pain of my eardrums bursting. My family was one in thousands of tethered families. Just having it in the first person, what it is, works better. There's no reason to do the you if it's first person, really. I mean, occasionally there's a use, and there's a great suggestion from T.R. Paulson that you might want to go to, that which once again was Susan Palwick, and that's Palwick. Her short story Gistella from her collection Fate of Mice. So check that out. There's ways that you can do. I know Joyce Carol Oates. I know some really good books that you use that for that. It's possible to do, but there should be like a reason, Let's see. So Mark Whittier says the use of the you instead of I here distances the narrator from the events, which is important for the overall impact of the piece. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying. Mark, thanks. I'm giving it a kind of objectivity that makes it more believable. Oh, so he's going the other way. Interesting. So he thinks it's more believable if it's you, because it's more objective. I don't know. I don't feel that way. I feel less connection. I feel more distance when there's a you replacing the I. This is Nate Jacob. Writing it from a you point of view almost lends a trauma response feeling. Distant, self-reassuring, remembering to remember in order to process. But we better retelling it. The better retelling if it were shorter and more to the point. Yeah. So if it was something like that, if this is like an actual like talking to yourself thing, it should feel like talking to yourself. And that's kind of the problem where it's existing in this limbo. And if you want to use Nate Jacobs' suggestion, you have to actually like think of how you would talk to yourself, I think. And there's none of that here. It doesn't feel like a monologue internalized, just in the way it's written. So, I don't know. Okay, we got to move on though. But really interesting, story and point of view and details. This is an interesting, piece of history that most people don't. I mean, I don't remember it very much. I remember it, slightly, but not much. Let's look at the haiku. And these will be quick as haiku often are. For haiku sequence. Noonish, your pappy's thermos smokestack on your scrap wood playtown. So I think this might be the same story in haiku. Let's see. Picketers, his broken side view mirror wrapped with cellophane. Bike rally, a gull feather stuck to the fairing. On the roadside, rudbeckia grows in half a mattress. Very interesting image there. Okay, so for haiku, And this is interesting. So when haiku are submitted, I'm always wondering, like some people just say haiku, and I'm not sure if it's linked. Like I'm not sure if we can pick and choose. And so sometimes, I'll say like, oh, we like these 4 or 5, and I'm not sure if they have to go together or not. But if you say sequence, then I assume that they're all supposed to go together as one poem. And so I'm not sure if that's the intention, but that's how I interpret for haiku sequence. If it's a sequence, they go together as it's one thing. So, noonish, your pappy's thermos, a smokestack, on your scrap, wood playtown. I just love that. I think that's a great haiku. I mean, your pappy's thermos, a smokestack, on your scrap wood playtown. Just a great image. And then the noonish sets the place. So for people who aren't really that familiar with haiku, the main thing is the cut here, the kirigi between, so you're having two worlds that sort of are existing parallel, and then they can be contrasted. And that's sort of the heart of what a metaphor is comparing two things, So a haiku is essentially a metaphor. But you're holding up one little world and another little world, and showing the way that they relate and creating that sort of creative, interesting feel. They call it ma in the Japanese. And this poem does it. So noonish is like all noons. It's all lunchtime type things at noonish, like this time of day. And then it calls back this memory of your pappy's thermos, a smokestack, and your scrap wood playtown, which is just a great, great image. And if anybody, wonders about the 575, that's just a myth. There's really no 575. You can look at, there's articles about why, but there's no syllable counting in Japanese anyway. It's kind of a myth. And there's they had their modernist revolution too. And, so modern haiku don't follow those same rules. Anyway, I think that's just a good one. So I like the first one a lot. Picketers. His broken side view mirror wrapped with cellophane. His broken side view mirror wrapped with cellophane. And this one, this one doesn't strike me as strongly, but it's still an interesting one. Picketers, his broken side view mirror wrapped in cellophane. It's a really great, really striking image. The connection to picketers is a little less, it's a little less surprising than where the noonish goes to me. So I don't think it's as strong, but I think it's a good one. I like it too. Bike rally, a gull feather stuck to the fairing. Bike rally, a gull feather stuck to the fairing. What's fairing? I'm not familiar with that use of that word. Okay, let's see. Fairing is a broad term used to describe protective paneling that wraps around the frame of a bike. Okay. So, those racing type motorcycles have the metal around the engine. That's the fairing. Okay. Bike rally, a gull feather stuck to the fairing. I think that's a good one too. On the roadside, Rudbeckia grows in half a mattress. Another great image. This one, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm having trouble because I just like all these haiku. I think they're all nice. Vicky's really good at haiku. I don't know if I have anything to say. It's just a matter of you write a lot of haiku and some resonate more than others. I love the noonish one. I love the image of the mattress. The bike rally, a gull feather stuck to the fairing. I just like these all. So the only one, picketers, I wonder if there's a better, something different that can be fit with that than picketers that would have a little more impact. Let's see what people are saying about the haiku. It's just great haiku, Vicki. Paul Corbia loves the picketers haiku. So I thought that was the weakest one. I'm not really sure why. It's hard to talk about haiku. Let's see. That's interesting. So Mark Gridnier suggests maybe the haiku could be mixed with the prose narrative of the first poem. And maybe, that's Haiban is the way that would work. And you would just intersperse these haiku that are sort of related but not. And that's the Haiban tradition. And there's a way that just is wonderful. I love it when we get Haiban submissions because there's a way that they break apart a long poem like this that's missing a little tension. You can add these haiku and make it a haibun, and then you get these like breaks in the action kind of. They go off into a different place and like add layers to it. And I think that actually works with these. So that's something to try too, is maybe like cut the poem in half, the first poem that was very long, cut that in half, and then make it a haibun. And that might have like enough sort of intensity and energy. The other thing though is I wonder if it's a story, that for the first long poem. But the haiku are great. I don't really have anything to suggest. I think if you, like you mentioned, you don't submit poems much. In the note here, this was an old submission. I pulled Vicky's out because it was from November 1st, 2020. I'm trying to take a randomly drawn critique of the week person, and then I take someone who's been waiting a long time. And so that was why we chose Vicki. And so maybe in the time since, Vicki is no longer as much of a novice at submitting as she mentions here. But the key to submitting is just do it. And if you submitted these to Modern Haiku or Frog Pond, eventually they would take some. It's always sort of a roll of the dice submitting anywhere. And you kind of got to just have to stick with it. I try to stick to places that don't have submission fees unless there's a good reason I really like them and want to support them anyway. Like as a donation. If you think of like a submission fee as a donation, I think that's okay. But if it's not something you would want to donate to, then don't pay a submission fee. But otherwise, just send out your stuff and it'll get published. Especially, I don't know, haiku's interesting because there's not many literary magazines that publish it. And the haiku community is sort of its own like nested side project. But there are a lot of really wonderful haiku journals too, and they publish a lot of work, and it's really fun to read. I like reading them all. And unfortunately, it doesn't appear in a lot of out. And these are published, I think. So these are good. Okay, let's move on. Well, let me make sure I'm not missing any comments. So for the first poem, because I forgot to go back to YouTube. For the first poem, Clayton Clark says, I felt this was more like a flash fiction, maybe a shorter list type poem. Could be interesting. Beautiful imagery. Love the feeling in the ending section. Richard Westheimer says, my ear with the haiku rhythms prefers a few more beats in the first line. There's different ways, how far you go from the short, long, short. And the thing is, in haiku, we've probably talked about this before, right? In haiku, Japanese isn't really a syllabic language, it's a moraic language. And so they don't hear syllables in the way that we do in English. Instead, they hear mora, which we really don't hear, and it's like the length of the sound. So like certain words, like noonish, for us it's 2 syllables, but in Japanese, a Japanese speaker would hear that as 3 mora, because the noon is like a length of 2. So noonish is how they hear it. And so it is 575 in that way. But there are more mora than there are syllables all the time. And so it never translates to syllables. And if you count 5 syllables, it's always too long. And that's the basis. That's the problem with 575. And then the other thing, like they went through a modernist revolution and they don't write haiku like this anymore. It'd be like saying that it's not, unless it's iambic pentameter, it's not a poem. And that's just something that's kind of silly to say. So it doesn't have to be that, but there still is this concept. Richard Gilbert in our conversation, he's a haiku scholar in Japan. He says that you should still go with short, long, short is sort of your ideal, but not count syllables. That's his suggestion. I've seen some other suggestions too. But that's the deal with syllables. And if you look through like modern haiku, which is the more modern I think it's a little more, pushes the boundary a little bit than Frog Pond does. There are a lot of one word lines, and even a lot of some haiku will just have one word on each line, like very, very short. There's very, very condensed things and very little focus on the length of the lines. So it just depends how you want to do it. And then we mentioned too, like Billy Collins likes the 17 syllable thing and just writes haiku that way because that's what he likes. And you can do whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. But I think and for me personally, I like the sparseness of a really short section. Like there's the cut here, and there's the cut here, and there's the cut here, I'd probably say the cut's here for that one. But each one has a cut, and I like a short like cut myself. I kind of like that. But I like all sorts of ways to do it. Okay, let's move on to the next poet. And this is, and I gotta get a drink. The problem, as I mentioned, doing this early in the morning is I really haven't drinking my coffee yet. And with the critique of the week, I'm just talking the whole time. I can't stop to sip. Okay, so this is Anna Idelevich. Let's see. Let me read this last comment because Clayton Clark just added a comment. He says, "I like the Hyben suggestion combined with the first, combining the haiku in the first poem. Don't think Vicki needs to worry about voice, but in the first one, just bring out more emotion by bringing in more close feeling." Yeah, exactly. I completely agree, Clayton. And I don't think the voice, it got a little. I don't think there's a problem with the voice. It got a little long. And didn't have as much emotional impact as it could have. But I thought the voice was fine, so I would, I agree. Let's see. Yeah. So Mark Grenier says, with the imagery and focus here, make these senru rather than traditional haiku, which tend to be more naturalistic traditionally. That's another thing. I mean, let's just get this haiku stuff out of the way. So the other thing with a haiku, and you can find all this stuff in the interview in Rattle number 47 with Richard Gilbert, or the Rattlecast, which is one of the first ones, like Rattlecast 4 or something with Richard Gilbert. We talk all about haiku. The problem with the nature imagery is there's just another tradition that we don't have here. And so you have to have a kigo and traditional haiku, which is a seasoned word. But a seasoned word is just a tradition that makes no sense in the English language because they have whole books, almost like a dictionary, of how every word is a certain season, and not every word, but so many words. And so like something like smokestack might be, that probably winter, we maybe think of, but thermos would be winter. But that's how it works. Like a mirror might be spring, And so they have this whole long tradition where tying these season words together, and you would sort of focus on the season that you're focusing on in the haiku, and not have like not mixed seasons kind of. But that's just not something that you can do in English because we don't have that tradition. So the distinction between then haiku and senru, which is, as Mark Grenier says, is more based on human experience and like human life, and haiku is more based on nature and with the kigo, and senru is without the kigo. The distinction sort of loses its value in English anyway, because we don't have that long tradition of season words and things. So it almost makes no sense. Some people have tried to make like an English version of, I can't remember what their books are called, but there's an actual, like I said, like an encyclopedia of where words go. And some people have tried to make that in English, and then you could do it that way, but it's just not a tradition that we have. Like every school student in Japan knows this whole sort of seasonal hierarchy, and we just don't have that here. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to focus on that for English haiku. Okay, so now let's move on for real. And but it's interesting to talk about this because it's the whole critique of the week is a learning process. So here is, and again, this is Anna Idelevich, and she didn't have any specific questions, so let's just look at these two poems. The first one is, and this is just poem number 1, it's not part of the poem. Early in the morning, jelly smokes over the water. Put semolina, semolina? What is that, semolina? So you can tell I haven't had my coffee yet. What is semolina? Am I saying that right? Semolina. Oh, that's the pasta. Okay, let's start over then. Early in the morning, jelly smokes over the water. Put semolina and millet in the boiler and make a dream in the ocean of love. Your love disheveled by braids, not just disgrace, curls of curly house, will fall like a beam into a ditch, will whisper to me, will embrace, and the line will run. He will press, he will kiss, and I'm ready, already a river. Very interesting first poem. Sorry for the adjustment of the lighting. Early in the morning. So repeating early in the morning is a weak kind of, there's nothing, like no reason to repeat it. And so it sort of weakens the intro. So just jump in with jelly smokes over the water. And we'll know that we're reading in through that first line. So early in the morning, jelly smokes over the water. And for some reason, I was thinking of fish because of the water. I was thinking it was a type of fish. But no, this is the pasta semolina. Put semolina and millet in the boiler and make a dream in the ocean of love. I like the phrase, a dream in the ocean of love. For what it's talking about. That's interesting. Your love, disheveled my braids, not just disgrace, curls of curly house. So I really love the opening here. I think that was really good because of the details. You can sort of, we know it's early in the morning, so we have the setting a little bit. Then we have an image right away, jelly smokes over the water. So we get this, and it's an unusual, jelly smoking over the water is an unusual image, but it's an image you can see. Put semolina and millet in the boiler and make a dream in the ocean of love. So I think it's a very good start. And then your love, disheveled my, so that in this section I have trouble following. Your love, disheveled my braids, not just disgrace, curls of curly house. So here the details like lose their sense of, it's just hard to follow along exactly what. Disheveled my braids sort of makes sense, but who disheveled your braids? Is it your love? Is it a continuation? Your love disheveled my braids? Or is it saying my braids are disheveled and it's an inversion of the syntax? It's hard to know what's going on there specifically. And then braids, not just disgrace. So why disgrace? Curls of curly house. And what's curly house? So I'm just like lost with this little section. I have no idea what's going on. We fall, and I'm just hearing sounds basically. We'll fall like a beam into a ditch. Will whisper to me. So the beam, all of a sudden, we get back at least an image that we can see. Will fall like a beam. We don't know what's falling like a beam into a ditch. Is it the braids? Will whisper to me. Will embrace the line. Will run. He will press. He will kiss. And I'm already a river. I love this last line. So I love the opening in the last line. Even this poem, if it was a tiny poem, if you just went like this, early in the morning, jelly smokes over the water, put I can't say that, semolina and millet in the boiler, and make a dream in the ocean of love. He will press, he will kiss, and I'm already a river. That could almost be a poem on its own. But this middle section, I just can't follow. So that's the issue for me, is this section right here. And because of that, I don't really get the story. So I don't really know exactly what's going on in a way that I feel like I'm missing something. Like if you leave the poem tiny like that, then you feel like I got what I'm told and supposed to get. But if you have this other section that I'm not following, I'm just thinking like, what am I missing? And so it's hard to, I don't know, it's hard to be, I don't feel like the poem works like that. Let's see what people are saying about this one. Nate Jacobs says, I don't know what jelly smokes over the water means, but I like it. Lots of nice words here. Yeah, I don't know what it means either. That's the thing. But it's still interesting. Let's see. And then over here. Okay, so no one else. If you have any suggestions for this poem, but this is just I feel like it's very incomplete based on what we have here. I just love the beginning, and I feel like it's some, romantic thing of making breakfast together, or the romantic partner, the he, or, somebody making breakfast, and then, I don't know. Jason Brenner says, it seems like the middle is playing too much with syntax, and I don't follow it all either. Yeah. So we're just lost at this section. And so we don't know what to take from the poem. Like, you have to sort of convey enough to let us follow you along. Even if you go to strange places, it's great as long as we can follow you. And Clayton Clark says the same, love the beginning and the end. So that's just basically what everybody's saying. And because this feels like a fragment of a poem that isn't done yet. So I don't know. So, and a lot of times what happens in a poem, especially a first draft or an early draft, is that you take a wrong turn, like down an alley, and you realize it's a dead-end street, and then, then you slap on an ending and the poem's over. Whereas if you took a different turn in a different direction, the poem would have kept going to the place it wanted to go. Because a poem is like a journey. Like it starts in one place and ends in another. It's like a map. It's a map of meaning, really. It finds meaning by going through this series of steps, like a magic spell would. And that's what a poem is. It's an utterance that does that. And so if you take a wrong turn, and maybe this disheveled my braids is the wrong turn. And once we got into this, we sort of lost track of where we were going. And if you just cut that out and go with a different line here, just do something totally different, then maybe the poem will sort of unlock itself and you'll get to the destination. Let's see. Febby Joseph says, I think in the middle section, love is disheveling. Love is falling like a beam, but it's still a bit vague. So is it the love? So I mean, the period is a tricky thing, and then the capital, so it's a new sentence. So if it's your love disheveled my braids, braids, not just disgrace, curls of curly house. I don't even know what that means. Even if it's love, I get the disheveled my braids. Like love could do that, but then I don't know what's the rest. And what's falling? Will the love fall like a beam into a ditch? Will whisper to me, will embrace, and the line will run. So I don't know. I can't follow it. Let's see. Over back to Facebook. Some of the images, this is Mark Grenier, says some of the images, jelly smokes, curls of curly house, etc., seem almost surrealistic. And yeah, that's the thing. If we can go to strange places in poems, but it has to be in a way that we can follow. And if you look at like Jabberwocky or something, that's all sorts of strange things that make no sense, but it's written with a path that you can follow. And so we sort of go through the motions of the path, and in a weird way, that's enough, which is what the point of that poem really is. And that's what this is missing. Like you sort of go into surreal directions, but like leave us stranded there, so we can't follow and we can't get out of this maze that you've left us. And I don't know. So I think this is just start here and rewrite and go in a different direction at this spot, and then maybe circle back to. I love the "I'm already a river." That's one of those very abstract lines that really resonates for some reason. I don't quite know why, but I really like it. So maybe, go in a different direction here and then try to get back to this river at the end. And that might be how this poem comes into fruition. Let's see. Laurel Benjamin says the hair is equated with the pasta. If this is true, keep it going and make sense of it. Yeah, extend this metaphor is another way. Hey, thanks for that suggestion, Laurel. So you could also extend this metaphor as a way to go somewhere else and take this and compare the hair, the braids, to the pasta, and let that be the sort of push that we get through this map that we're following. Let's see. Okay, let's move on to the other poem. Let me get another sip of my coffee. Okay. This is, we went out into the night, the jackets were buttoned. We went out into the night, the jackets were buttoned. So again, we repeat this title, which I wouldn't do, unless it's some kind of like refrain where it's being repeated all the time. It's just weaker the second time, and so you're left with this like weak feeling at the beginning, which is just you're not gaining anything, you're losing a little bit. So I just cut this first line, but we went out into the night, the jackets were buttoned, lanterns, honey of audience, and the graffiti was emphasized in black. We don't need about love conventions. Emphasized in black. We don't need. The stars breathe in fumes, gas. They understand tenacious, different. They understand tenacious, different, sorry. And our cars are on the highway, foreshadow the 2 o'clock. Lips strewed with grains, and the words are baked sleeplessly. I don't need you, and the other, even in the morning, sweet swearing. Passing high arches, the lanterns above them pour in flames. Moths on the bumper, and in the lamp, so many of our verses will die. They swallowed from resentment and watches, trends. I'm in a beautiful nightmare with you. Let them go drunk. There is no competition when together. And the bass player of the night is a black song, skeletons, people. You caress my feet in a taxi. In the twilight, your madness. Who will move those lines from you? If I love. Drunk, drunk, month also flogs, which is not for the weather. So again, we have some really beautiful phrases and images that end up very disconnected and hard to follow along. It's not very inviting to the reader, but they're just really great images, though, at the same time, and interesting turns of phrase. We went out into the night. The jackets were buttoned. It's a really interesting detail. Lanterns, honey of audience. I mean, that's interesting, but it's hard to figure out what that means. The graffiti was emphasized in black. We don't need about love conventions. So here, and again, the syntax is hard to follow, and the graffiti was emphasized in black. We don't need about love conventions. So the black is what we don't need. It's just hard to, it's easy to trip over that like I did. The stars breathe in fumes, gas. They understand tenacious, different. Gas, they understand tenacious, different. And our cars are on the highway, foreshadowed the 2 o'clock. Lips strewed, I think it should be strewn. Where is it? Strewn, should be an N there. With grains, and words are baked sleeplessly. I don't need you, and the other, even in the morning, sweet swearing. Passing high arches, the lanterns above them pour in flames. So here's where we get to, so this feels to me like sort of like, warming up your engine or whatever. I mean, there's some nice lines here, but then it sort of is spinning its wheels and going nowhere. But once it hits this, the lanterns, it feels like you sort of hit like a vein of interesting meaning or something, right? And the words were baked sleeplessly, I don't need you, and the other, even in the morning, sweet swearing, passing high arches. See, I'm lost, but then the lanterns above them pour in flames, moths on the bumper. We get the bumper in this taxi kind of thing. So many of our verses will die. So this is much clearer writing, actually. They swallowed from resentment and watches trends. I don't understand that, but I'm in a beautiful nightmare with you. Let them go drunk. There is no competition when together. And the bass player of night, I love that phrase, the bass player of the night. That's really good. Is a black song. I like that too. It's just a great line. You caress my feet in a taxi. And again, now we get the you caressing my feet just with 4 words in a taxi. And, if you add that too, we know where we are. And there's like there's a subject, we know who's there in that line. In the twilight, our madness. Who will move those lines from you if I love? Drunk, drunk moth also flogs, which is not for the weather. So there's little bits that I understand, but it's really hard to follow for me. Laurel Benjamin's suggestion is take out all punctuation, one root idea. Since we have disparate images, we would still need parallel structure even without punctuation. Jamie O'Halloran Whitmarsh says the poet is playing with imagery and syntax in interesting ways, playing with delineation and white space, and abandoning punctuation might make the images and syntax more effective. Let's see. Okay, that was the last poem. I'm just having trouble connecting and following along with this. That's the issue here. Jason Brenner says, I think if you took this and reinserted the rules of grammar, it would bring out the meaning a lot more for me. Yeah. So this reminds me of a poem. Let's see. Just because of the subject matter, I'm going to compare it to let's see if I can find this. So because of the taxi and the night and the kind of relationship thing going on, this reminded me of Courtney Campus' poem Nocturne in what now feels like a very silly dress. And so I'm going to show this a little bit. And Oops, this needs to be adjusted. Here it is. So, yeah, this is the Courtney Campa poem. Courtney Campa there. Actually, let Courtney Campa read it. Why not? Well, that's weird. Let me see. Properties.
Dress.
Okay, so everything was reset on my audio, but we'll start now.
Nocturne in what now feels like a very silly dress. Tonight there are no taxis in Harlem, and the moon is somewhere, mustering itself the way a man does to take himself to someone else. You know this night, the one so large you can stand full height inside it, your eyes blade level with its throat. And this street, you know it too. Busy intersection where you speak a little louder to be heard above the blood inside you, gunning two directions like traffic down a bridge. The taxi, if you could find one, is for only you, though he is standing here. Because though he's just left you, he won't leave you until he's seen you safely on your way. The good guy, the gentleman, fearing nothing so much as appearing not to be. He has to think a little louder to be heard above these speeches corked inside him, the ones he knows you wouldn't listen to in a way he would enjoy. He has watched you die before. His silence, which is a doorlessness the street comes also to resemble. His hands half hidden in his shirt sleeves like a boy.
Yeah, and once again, that was Courtney Campa. That was from the issue number 43's Tribute to Love Poems. And Courtney Campa says, why write revenge? But there's a similar subject matter going on here in a similar setting. But see the difference here, the fact that we know where we are. That tonight there are no taxis in Harlem. You know, Courtney is free to, leap into sort of abstract metaphors and things throughout the poem. The night being a doorlessness and things like that. But we're happy to make any kind of leap that we want with her because we know what the situation is. So Nocturnes, we know it's the night. We know there's no taxis in Harlem. The one's so large you can stand full height inside, your eyes blade level with its throat. So we're getting very abstract, metaphors, but they work because we know who's speaking and we get sort of the scene unfolding before us. And then we're willing to sort of follow all this stuff that happens. And that's what's missing in this poem. There's similar, really great metaphors and images in the poem here, which is, we went out into the night, the jackets were buttoned. But because you can't connect, it's missing that connective tissue, that it's hard to follow what exactly is going on and so to have any kind of emotional response to it, basically. And so, I don't know, I mean, my advice is to treat your reader a little more friendly and let us into the story you're telling. And don't try to distance yourself from our own understanding of it as readers, because you want your readers to know what you're talking about. Books, in a book, if there's a larger story in a poem as part of it, and it's just one in a series of poems, like maybe we can pick up what's going on. But for just a poem, we're sort of just left stranded, like in the night with no taxi or something. Mark Grenier says, these poems both seem to be love poems of a sort, but their intents are not clear. They are asking us to make broad leaps of understanding, perhaps in a personal world that seem to break my contact with what is going on. Well said there. Yeah. So my advice really is to look at Courtney Campa's poem. Look closely at what she's doing and how she's letting the story unfold and letting us in on the story, because that's what we don't have as readers. So a lot of times we talk about this idea of like there being public poetry and private poetry, and they both have value. But if it's a poem meant for public, for strangers to be able to go on the journey with you, then you need to let us in, and so we can understand what's going on, and so we can get something out of it. And so look at that Courtney Campa poem, other poems by her too. She's a great poet, and there's an interview with her, and that was in Rattlecast like 60 or something. So you can check that out too. But let me see if there's any more comments. Mark Grenier says, when the syntax breaks, these poems become very difficult to make sense of. Similarly, when the images leap from one realm to another, I lose contact with what is going on. And that's just the problem. They leap too much and expect too much of the reader to know what's going on. And I don't know. I always wonder about these kind of poems. Just from an editor's perspective, because you get a lot of submissions are like this. And I wonder if it's like a distancing from the emotion of it that causes that, or not wanting to reveal the actual story. Or I wonder if there's a sort of another poetry, which is not like the kind of poetry we publish where people enjoy the deep abstraction and aren't following along. I'm not sure. I mean, it just doesn't work for me or what we're looking for. But there's great images in here there's a lot of stuff. If we were just let in, there's a lot of stuff to enjoy and appreciate. There's great lines in terms of phrases. Really that the bass player of the night is a black song is just a great line. You can't find a better line than that in any poem or critique or anything. It's just great, good stuff. So finding a way to get the creativity that this writing in this style allows to come out, but then stepping back and thinking about how a reader is going to interpret and follow along, and sort of leaving us enough of a thread that we can follow. Like we're like almost like we're in a dark cave, in a poem like Courtney's, gives us a rope that we can go, even though we don't know exactly what's going on. We have a rope that we're holding on to, like a tether, so we don't get lost in this cave. And with a poem like this, we're just sort of feeling the walls and listening for a voice, and we don't even know which way it's coming from almost. And that's kind of the sense of the difference between the two. So you got to throw us a rope. And that's my advice for both these poems, because both these poems are very, very similar, and that they both have great images and lines, but are too disconnected from the audience, from the reader. Okay, so we are going to really quickly do another random drawing to figure out who's going to be up on the Critique of the Week next. So I'm going to go to random.org. They have a list randomizer. Let's see, I'm going to accept cookies. And I'm going to go to their list randomizer. Here's the screen view. This is the list randomizer at random.org. I'm going to put the list of people who have been waiting for a long time in some cases into here. And I'm not sure. We'll see how many people are on it too. And you can see, here we go. All I'm doing is pushing randomize. And there we go. So the next ones from the random half of the show will be Jason Cabrera, Charlie Jackson, Allison Sills, Joyce Robinson, and maybe Drea Joseph. I think those will be the 5. And then we will now pick a pairing that goes well, like wine and cheese or something, for what to go with those submissions. So that's going to be the next ones coming up. And that is all for the Critique of the Week. Thanks everybody for joining me. I have to remind you that there is no Rattlecast this weekend. We're doing a live event here in Southern California. So if you want to come out, there's a poetry reading live. I thought about maybe live streaming it, but it's just not the same. It's not like a podcast, just hearing someone read. But Michael Meyerhofer and Kathleen McClung are both going to be here doing a reading and a workshop. So that's why there's no Rattlecast this week. Figure we take a week off. And but I do. Let's see. If you go to, I'm about to do an interview. If you want to check that out, if you go to litmagnews.substack.com, let me show you this. So, oops. I guess the music goes off when I switch screens. But litmagnews.substack.com is here, and there's I hate my face being everywhere, but there's an interview in an hour, less than an hour, 50 minutes. We'll be doing an interview with Becky Tooch. I'm not sure how she says that, or Touch. But this is Lit Mag News. They do a great job of sharing Lit Mag News. Becky's been doing this for a long time. She was the editor of Review. There's a whole interview series that's been going on this summer. So I'm going to be doing that in an hour on Zoom. So if you want to go there and see me in like 50 minutes with Becky, feel free to do that. Okay, so again, no show this week, but the next guest on the Rattlecast, is going to be Deborah Piccologi. So we'll talk about haiku, actually. It's kind of interesting that we're talking about haiku, but Deborah Piccologi is a haiku poet. Highway of Sleeping Towns is a book of haiku and senru, so we can talk about the differences between those two on the show, too. She's also into science fiction poetry and part of that Science Fiction Poetry Association we were talking about with Vince Gotera last episode. She has a whole bunch of different projects. I think she has 3 separate projects she's working on now. They're all completely different, and we're going to be talking about all 3. And so one of them is The Highway of Sleeping Towns, her book of haiku, but we'll be talking about other stuff too. And the prompt for this week was, I don't remember at all. Let me see. The prompt for the upcoming, so you have a week and a half to do it still. The next prompt was you've been driving for hours on a long, empty stretch of highway. It's miles and miles of nothing but desert landscape, no rest stops, no gas stations. Just when you're starting to think you'll never see civilization again, a building comes into view. What is it? Write a poem about it. That's your prompt for Rattlecast number 111, which will be not this Sunday, but next Sunday, September 26th at the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great weekend. I'll talk to you next week for the critique of the week, I guess. Have a good night or day.